All right. So good news, bad news for today. We have 45 minutes, and I have probably more slides than we'll be able to cram in 45 minutes. So we're going to be moving pretty quickly. I'm certainly willing to stay later if anybody wants to stay on and ask questions or talk more about some of the content that's being provided. So let me give you a little overview of what FoxPoint Solutions does. So as Duran mentioned, I'm a principal at FoxPoint Solutions, and we kind of operate out of these three buckets. So there's compliance, and we focus on a lot of different industries, but certainly higher ed, financial, healthcare, et cetera. We spend a lot of time in those areas, and we'll do assessments to kind of gauge where you're at in comparison to, say, laws and regulations, industry best practice, right? We can come in, do an assessment to tell you kind of where you're at and where you need to be. We also spend a lot of time in what I would refer to as like this trusted advisor space, where we can come in and act as a member of your leadership, either in your information technology department as a chief information security officer, or within your IS department as a chief information security officer, right? You'll notice that like there's a word virtual there. And what this is really, it's a consumption model. So if you don't want to have a full-time CIO or CISO, you can bring in a vCISO or vCIO, right, to kind of fill the gaps. And again, it's a consumption model. So if all you want to work on is, say, policies, well, we can come in and do that. If you just want to do strategy for IT, we can come in and do that, right? Or if you want us to run the whole thing, run your IT department, run your information security department, we can do that as well. The other thing that we focus on is technology. So we use technology in our practices. So if we come in and do a vCISO engagement, we have a whole stack of solutions that we can put in place to help you kind of monitor and measure our progress. We have a whole security stack that we can put in place. That's things like your anti-malware, your security awareness training, and your incident response type systems. We do a lot in the penetration testing space. So if you want to know if your controls are working, penetration testing is the only way to do it other than having an actual incident or a breach. And the last thing is we kind of refer to it as tech enablement, where we'll come in and if you need like a Microsoft 365 deployed, you want to have Windows Autopilot, you want to have new technology deployed, we can come in and do that as well. All right, so we work with boards on a regular basis. So through our vCIO and our vCISO services, we are regularly reporting to boards, and we continually hear from them kind of the same thing. We'll usually ask them like, what sort of information are you looking for from us? And we'll usually hear, well, we don't really know what to ask. We don't know what to look for. And we also hear a lot like when they're talking to their IT departments, they don't really understand some of the things that they're saying because there's a lot of technical jargon in there. And I'm sure you probably all experienced this when you're talking to somebody in your IT department. They'll start saying things that you have no idea what it means, right? We've probably all been on the receiving end of that. So what I want to do today is try and go through and arm you with information so that when you hear certain things from your IT and IS department, you can understand what it is. Also, I'm going to arm you with a lot of questions that you can be posing to them to help hold them accountable. All right, so let's just kind of start out with defining the respective disciplines within kind of IT and information security. So if we work kind of left to right here, your information technology department, in this most simplest way, is going to keep the trains running, right? If you've ever said, I don't know how any of this works, I just come in and my computer just turns on and I do what I do, right? That's your IT department. That's them keeping the lights on. They're doing all their maintenance. They're deploying your applications. They're maintaining all that stuff, right? That's your IT department. Your information security department is going to do stuff that's going to be a little bit different. They're not going to have their hands in the technology. They will work with your information security department to put the right controls in place. They'll say, well, this system is really important, therefore we need to have multi-factor authentication or some other controls in place. They'll say our systems need to be encrypted because we have really important data, right? So they'll kind of define like what controls need to be in place, and then they'll hand that off to your IT department. Your compliance department is going to be a little bit different. They are not going to do it InfoSec department does. They're also not going to do what IT does. They're going to define what laws and regulations you have to comply with. So something like in the healthcare industry, they'll look at the HIPAA security rules and they'll say, okay, these are the rules we need to comply with as it relates to our systems that are storing PHI. They'll give those controls to InfoSec. InfoSec then kind of translates that into something that IT can understand and then IT implements, right? So everyone's kind of working together, but there is overlap between these, but they all kind of have distinct disciplines, and that whole separations of duty is really important here, because you don't want InfoSec having control of the technology. You'd also don't want InfoSec deciding on policy, right? So that's where these things are. It's important to hold for accountability and separation of responsibilities. All right, so I wanted to touch on some key terms that you've probably heard before, but I always hear these terms being used interchangeably. And while they can mean something similar, they actually have very distinct meanings. So when we're talking during a data breach, right? We'll usually hear people jump right to saying it's a breach, it's a breach, it's a breach. And there's a lot that goes into determining if something is a breach. So I want to distinguish kind of these terms you might hear your IT or your IS departments throwing around, but also arm you with using these terms in a way that makes more sense or aligns with whatever is really going on. So an event is something that's happening all the time. You joining this webinar is an event. You logging in your computer is an event. You failing to log into your computer is an event. It doesn't mean that it's bad. It's just something that's happening within your network. So you connect to your Wi-Fi at the office, that's considered an event. You log off at the end of the day, that's considered an event. However, there's also an incident. So an incident is something like a malware infection, right? You get a virus on your computer, but it doesn't really cause like damage in the sense where data has been exposed, right? It's certainly something that needs to be tracked. Certainly have to figure out how it got in, how you can prevent it from happening again. But if credentials weren't stolen, unauthorized access didn't happen, data wasn't exposed, right? Then it's not. What the next one is a breach, right? And this is the really bad one, where a breach is going to be unauthorized access. Somebody gains access to customer data or employee data, and at that point, it is a breach, right? And you want to get that, you're probably going to involve your IS department, your legal, executive leadership, right? And you're all going to figure out how you are going to respond to this thing. So one tip I want to give you is be careful about saying the word breach or really documenting the word breach. I would not use that term until somebody confirms that it is actually a breach. Again, there's a lot of nuances to determining if something is actually a breach. So work with your legal department, work with your IT, your IS, your privacy attorneys, right? Whoever's kind of documented in your incident response plan, let them make a determination if something is a breach. Because here's the thing, if you start sending text messages and Teams messages and emails saying there was a breach, and we've seen companies, maybe they won't do anything about it right away, but later it turns out to be a lot worse than they thought. Now they get subpoenaed, they have to produce this information, and it turns out now they're negligent, right? Because they didn't respond in a timely manner. They knew something was going on, but they didn't respond. So again, be really careful about what you are putting into into electronic communications, because in today's world, everything is discoverable. Even your text messages, even if it's your private phone, they can subpoena your cell phone records, and someone like a Verizon would have to produce it. So again, be really careful about using that word. Other security terms to really know, there's a difference between your incident response plan, disaster recovery, and business continuity. Again, I hear these kind of all being used interchangeably. Your incident response plan is your overarching approach to how you are going to respond to a cyber incident. It's going to define how you are going to identify threats, how you are going to respond to those threats. It is not going to be an exact, like, here is how we are going to respond to business email compromise or malware, right? It is going to be your overarching approach to how you are going to respond to pretty much a lot of different types of incidents. Then there's your incident response playbooks. This is where you get into your step-by-step procedures of defining how you are going to respond to certain types of incidents. So something like business email compromise, a ransomware infection, insider threats, right? These are, you would have specific playbooks so that your IT and IS and your leadership have an actual step-by-step, here's how we are going to respond. The playbooks are really critical because when there's a serious incident happening, I can tell you everybody's running around like crazy. They're panicking. They're all just trying to get their jobs done so they can get their systems back online. And it's important to have something to reference so that you can go, okay, this is what we should be doing right now. Now, granted, it's not always going to be like, okay, step 1, step 2, step 3. These incidents can be much more fluid than that. But again, it's a reference. Say, oh yeah, we're supposed to save the forensic data. We're supposed to contact this person and so on, right? That's where those playbooks come in really handy. And then disaster recovery and business continuity, again, those are two terms that get used very interchangeably. Disaster recovery is not business continuity, and business continuity is not disaster recovery. Disaster recovery is there is something like a ransomware outbreak, your systems have been taken down. Disaster recovery is going to be like your backups, right? Your backups, you use your backups to then restore your systems. Business continuity is going to be how you continue operations while your disaster recovery is happening. So one of your critical systems is taken down by a cyber attack. Well, you would then have a business continuity plan that say, okay, how do we keep doing that process without the system? Right. So again, like these things are very different, and it's important to kind of understand the differences between them and why each one is important. Okay, so there's distinct differences between what the board should be doing and what management does. The board, I think that two of the biggest things that board that can do is ask the right questions and hold management accountable, right? Board's going to kind of set the direction and the expectations for what management should be doing. They should be assisting management with making kind of overseeing risk. So a good example of that would be maybe your IT department's considering moving all of your data from on-premise into the cloud, right? And that's something that the board may want to get involved in because, okay, what are the costs that are going to be associated with that? What are the risks that we are trying to mitigate? The cost of a control should not be more than the risk, right? So if your control is $1 million, but the risk is maybe $10,000, you probably don't want to put that control in place. And that's the stuff where we're looking for the boards to kind of help IT and IS manage. But then there's the management side, which they're doing the work, right? You're kind of setting the direction. They are implementing. They're keeping the lights on every day. And in my opinion, one of the most important things that your management can be doing is relaying metrics, key performance metrics to the board, right? And this is where I think the board can hold IT and IS accountable is by using metrics to see, are they doing exactly what they say they should be doing? So good examples of this would be in your policies. There probably says that your IT and IS are doing certain tasks, like annually they should be doing a penetration test. Well, are they actually doing that? And how are they remediating those vulnerabilities? What are the timelines for those? How are they being tracked? Right? There's probably lots of things in your policies that your IS and your IT departments are saying that they're doing, but you want to use metrics to kind of hold them accountable. And I'm going to show you a whole bunch of metrics here that you're going to be able to use. All right, so what I want to get into, I mentioned earlier, like I want to arm you with kind of very specific things that you can be bringing back to your IT and IS department so you can start kind of asking them very pointed questions. So here's where we're going to start diving into that. All right, starting with cyber insurance. Everybody, if you are managing any sort of regulated data, if you have really sensitive data, if you have intellectual property, you really want to have cyber insurance these days. The average cost of a breach is upwards of $10 million, and it's going to assist organizations in recovering recovering from those cyber incidents by helping you with the costs related to an incident. A lot of the stuff that you might already be thinking about, which is okay, like fines and other things, but also your expenses are going to go up dramatically if you have a major cyber incident because your team is going to be working around the clock. You might have to bring in a third party to help you recover. If you're using an MSP or somebody else manages your network, well, most likely they are going to charge you double time, or there's going to be some sort of increase in using their services to get you back online, right? Then there's the productivity loss, right? Revenue loss. There's a lot that goes into or that goes into why cyber insurance is really important, right? So these are some of the questions that you're probably going to want to ask your IT, your IS, or even legal about your cyber insurance, right? Are there any types of incidents that our policy does not cover? If you have never looked at your cyber insurance policy, I can tell you a third of it is going to be everything it does not cover. All the scenarios that it doesn't cover, right? So you want to make sure you want to work with your IT and IS department to say, okay, what are the common sort of attacks that we might see, and does our cyber insurance cover those things? Are there coverage limits sufficient for the potential financial impact? So if you have, let's say you have $10 million worth of data on your network, but your cyber insurance policy only costs $1 million, is only going to cover up to $1 million. Well, you're going to have a huge gap there. And the ways that you determine how much your data is worth is there's tools you can put on your network that'll basically scour your network. It'll identify the data and it'll associate a value to it to determine what it would cost if that data was breached. You can then use that data to compare it to your policy to see if you're out of alignment there, right? If you're way out of alignment, again, if you have 10 million worth of data and you have $1 million policy, if that data is exposed, that other 9 million is going to have to come from somewhere, right? Which is usually going to come out of the business. Does a policy cover regulatory fines, legal defense, and PR costs? Regulatory fines are hit or miss being covered by cyber liability insurance. If you have followed the news at all, the regulatory fines can be absolutely astronomical depending on what industry you're in. Legal defense, what we're seeing happen a lot is that companies are being sued after the regulatory fines get settled, all those other things, right? So now you're paying your customers directly for any sort of violation or negligence that might be found. And the same thing kind of with all the PR costs. PR costs can get very expensive because you're talking about providing notification. In some cases, you have to stand up a call center. You're obviously going to want to go out and do marketing to try and deal with the negativity that's coming out from the media. Right, so a lot can go into that. So you want to be sure that some of those things are covered by your cyber insurance. Are you meeting all the security requirements? So I mentioned earlier that a third of your policy is probably what it's not going to cover. So in there, it's going to say if you're not doing all of the things that they expect you to do, or really when you sign up for cyber liability insurance, most of them are asking you a pretty lengthy questionnaire, like, are you encrypting your data? Are you evaluating risk? Like, there's probably a lot of questions in there. If you're answering yes to those, but you're not really doing them effectively, if you have a data breach and they determine that you're not doing them, you're not going to get covered. Who is authorized to engage the insurer? So in your incident response plan, who is defined as the person that's going to call the cyber liability insurance? Who's engaging them? Where is the information to contact them, right? Is that in your incident response plan? Is it stored somebody else? Is there more than one person that is authorized to contact them, right? Because generally when you're setting up your cyber liability insurance, you're going to define who is authorized to make a claim. You don't want that to be just one person. You want to have at least a few people that are authorized to submit a claim. Does the insurer provide any complementary services? So if you don't have like a really robust information security applications, sometimes your insurer will provide you with tabletop exercises, vulnerability scans, and a variety of other things, right? Ask your cyber liability insurance if they have things that they can provide you, and you can see if it can maybe either supplement what you have or maybe even replace what you have. And the last thing is, has anybody outside of your organization reviewed your policy? So a lot of people go directly to the insurance company to get their policies. Have you spoken with a broker? Have you spoken with a privacy attorney? That these people live in these policies to kind of take a look at your policy and see if there's any gotchas in there and that if maybe you should make some changes. Okay, risk management. So this is a big one that should be integrated into your change management process. Risk management is pretty simple on the surface, right? It's basically identifying threats to your organization before you make some sort of change, right? And you're basically identifying what the threats are. You're coming up with a plan to mitigate those things, and then you are working towards a plan to actually start checking those boxes off, right? If you have a plan that's like got 5 items on it, you want to have somebody assigned to it, and you want to have due dates assigned to all of those things. So risk management is a critical component of a change management process, right? It should be integrated into your project management process, or if you have a separate like change management board, you would want your risk management built into that. There should be criteria defined for, well, what qualifies as a change and what changes qualify as risk management. So some of the things that you want to be asking, it could be a variety of different people involved in risk management. It could be IT, it could be IS. If you're a larger company, you might have somebody dedicated to risk management. It might be your legal department. It could be a whole bunch of people. But what you want to start out with, do we have a formal risk management program, right? Who's running the risk management program, right? Somebody needs to own it, because there's a lot of different levels of risk management. You can have risk management within IT, within information security. There's also enterprise risk management, which is going to cover things like legal risk and business risk. So if you do have enterprise risk management, your IT, IS, and all your other risk management being done at the management level should be flowing up into your enterprise risk management. So if you've determined you have a risk management program, is it integrated into change management? If you're supposed to be doing risk assessments based on certain changes, you want to get that into your change management. When are risk assessments conducted? Again, this goes to what is the trigger to conduct a risk assessment? Who is doing those? Who is holding somebody accountable for completing those risk assessments? Is there a risk register somewhere, right? A risk register doesn't have to be fancy. It could just be an Excel spreadsheet that says this was the change. Here's what the risks are. Here's the plan to mitigate those risks. And then somebody needs to go back to that register on a regular basis and say, okay, Jim, you were supposed to complete this on this date. What's going on with that? And lastly, like, what are the percentage of identified risks have been mitigated? So what we often see with risk management programs is they have a process for doing risk assessments, but they don't close the loop, meaning they don't actually mitigate the risks. So if you have identified 100 risks and 90 of them are still open after 12 months, well, then there's something missing in the process there, and you want to make sure that those things are closed on a timely basis. Okay, disaster and incident readiness, right? This kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier about these kind of interchangeable terms that we hear being used all the time. Just as a refresher, right, your incident response plan is the overarching approach to how you are going to respond to an incident. Your playbooks is the very specific step-by-step how you are going to respond to certain types of incidents. Then there's your business continuity and disaster recovery. Business continuity is going to kind of keep the trains running, right, during a disaster. It's how you're going to continue to conduct business while your systems are being brought online. But there's 2 important metrics there as it relates to business continuity and disaster recovery, and that is your recovery point objective and your recovery time objective. A recovery point objective is how much data are you willing to lose before it can start damaging the business. So if you say this system can't be down for 24 hours, but we can't lose more than 24 hours worth of data in the system, but we're only doing backups once a week, well, then the operational side doesn't align with the organization kind of expectations. And then there's the RTOs, which is how long can the system be down before we start getting damaged, right? So again, if you say, well, it's going to take us 3 days to restore the system, but executive manager like, yeah, that can't be down for more than a few hours. Again, your procedures are not aligning with executive expectations. And I'll give you some data or a spreadsheet. I'll show you here in a couple minutes that you can use to define these RTOs and RPOs and hold your IT and IS accountable. So, but what's really critical here is that we are testing the controls, and I'm just going to jump to the next slide because we'll talk more about that now. So, step one, like, do you have a documented incident response plan and disaster recovery plan? These are great questions to pose to your IT and your IS departments. Generally, your IS department's going to manage your incident response plan. Your disaster recovery plan will mainly be managed by your IT department with input by your IS. When were they last updated, right? These are things that should be updated on an annual basis because, well, your systems change, your processes change, right? You want your incident response plan and disaster recovery plan, even your business continuity plan to reflect those things. How often are they tested, right? This varies from company to company. Some companies might say, well, we're comfortable with testing them once a year. Other companies might say we want them tested quarterly. It really just depends. But you want to make sure that they're at least tested annually, right? And what are those test results? What were they? How were those test results? If there was problems, how are those things remediated, right? The last thing you want to do, especially with disaster recovery, is a big mess happens. Your IT goes to restore your backups, but they don't work, right? They haven't worked in months, right? That's why the testing is so important so that you can verify that what you've written down is actually going to work, right? And then define what is your RPOs and RTOs, right? That recovery time objective and recovery point objectives. You should be asking those questions about your critical systems, right? How long is it going to take to restore something, and how much data are we going to lose? If your IT and IS has made that decision without the board's or executive leadership's input, then there might be a huge disconnect in what's going on. Absolutely ask them that question. Based on the last test, will we meet those objectives? Again, your part of your disaster recovery process is not just restoring the backup, but bringing it back to operation. So again, can they meet these objectives, right? If they can't, then it's a discussion between your executive leadership and your management to determine, well, do we need to make future investments? Do we need to adjust expectations, right? Those are things that need to be discussed, right? And what are your critical systems? And do you know if those things are being backed up, right? It should be, if you have 10 critical systems, all 10 of those things are being backed up. So you definitely want to, again, you want to be poking and kind of prodding to make sure that, again, IT and IS is doing what you are expecting them to do. All right, security awareness. Everybody should be doing security awareness training when they are hired, and at least annually, but as well as there should be regular communications coming out from whoever owns your information security program. So as threats evolve, your IT or IS or whoever the responsible party is should be sending out regular communication saying, hey, we're seeing this hitting us. Be really careful. Here's how you respond to those things. The more you can get in front of your employees about what to look for and how to respond, the better you're going to start creating a culture of security. But the one thing to like really point out here is that security awareness training provides the most value and the most effectiveness against for preventing a breach, preventing incidents. The over 80% of incidents start with a person. In a lot of cases, we think they're hacking in through a firewall or something like that. That's not really what's happening anymore. They just got to send somebody a link, right? But it's important. It's so important today that your users understand what to look for and then how to respond to what's coming at them. But also, it's really critical that they understand how to respond if they make a mistake, right? We want to make sure that there's like this clear communication, an open door type policy where it's like, hey, if you make a mistake, come to me right away. We'll get it fixed, right? And we'll deal with whatever the ramifications of that are. But we certainly want to make sure that our staff understand that they can come to us if they make a mistake, and that the sooner they come to us, the less impact there'll be to the organization. So the things that the board should be asking is, tell me about our information security or our security awareness training program, right? How often our employees are being trained? What percentage of employees have completed the training, right? You should easily be over 90% of people that are completing it either at the start of hire or on an annual basis. How is the effectiveness of the program being measured? Meaning, at the end of your training should be some sort of testing or something along those lines. Are you tracking the number of incidents that are happening, and is that number either steadily going down over time or is it going up over time? Right? These are metrics that you're going to want to hold them again so that you can say, like, this is clearly not working. We have to rethink what we're doing here. Are you doing phishing simulations, right? The phishing simulation, again, going back to like testing your controls, people, your employees, we refer to them as the human firewall. So they are a control as well, right? So what are the results of those phishing tests? Like, what are the rates? I can tell you the industry standard for failure rates for phishing is 5% or below, right? If your company is at 30%, then you could be very likely either had a breach already or one is coming, right? So you want to make sure that your phishing tests, you have good scores on your phishing tests, and you have a way that you are going to deal with those repeat offenders, right? And that's something that you want to ask, like, what percentage of employees are repeat offenders, and what are we doing about those repeat offenders, right? Are we holding them accountable? Are we putting them through other training? Is there some sort of like escalation of, you failed 3 times, right? There's an escalation where you're talking with a manager or executive leadership, right? It's important that others are getting involved, especially as you go farther up kind of the leadership ladder in an organization, right? They need to be coming down a little bit and saying, hey, you're making mistakes. You need to do a better job. Right. And the last one is, how are we promoting a security first culture? And goes back to what is the approach for your security awareness training, right? We see a lot of companies, what they'll do is they'll get something like a KnowBe4, and they'll just use that to send out the trainings. They'll do their phishing simulations, but there's no communication from upper management. There's no communication from middle management. There's no communication from from whoever's owning the security awareness program, right? The most important thing you can do for security awareness is repetition, repetition, repetition. Everybody's got to be saying the same thing. Your executive leadership has to be saying the same thing as your middle management, and then your frontline managers need to be saying the same thing as everybody else, right? They need to be promoting that message that this is important and here is why. All right. I've said this a few times already, but testing your controls, penetration testing is the only way you can verify that your controls are working without actually being in an incident. A penetration test is you hire some ethical hackers. They will then try to break into your systems. They will try and break in from externally, and then they'll also do what we call an internal penetration test, where you basically let them in, but then you just see how far they can get. Like, can they get to what we refer to as the crown jewels, right? Well, that's going to be your really, really sensitive data. They are going to try to exploit weaknesses within your environment. They're not going to break anything. They're just going to like kind of incrementally just kind of make their way into systems. But what they can also do is it goes beyond the technical side of penetration testing. The internal and external penetration test of them trying to hack into your tech side of your environment is one thing, but you also want to test your people. So what you can also do with a pen test is you can set it up that they are going to call your employees. They're going to pretend to be a member of your IT department or some other organization. They're going to try and extract information out of them. They're going to send them phishing simulations, right? And they're basically going to build a real life scenario. Somebody calling your employees to try and extract information out of them is a real threat that is actually happening today. So you want to frame up your penetration tests in a way that aligns with common threats. And as those threats evolve, your testing should evolve with it. So questions about your pen test that you should be asking. How often are penetration tests performed? They should be done at least annually. Biannually is even better. Are both internal and external tests performed? Do tests include social engineering attacks? Those social engineering attacks is them calling your employees, then sending them phishing emails. Now, you may be doing phishing emails through something like a KnowBe4 or something else, but integrating it into your pen test it's a layered attack, which is what we see happening out there a lot, where they'll send an email saying, hey, this thing is happening. We need to help you, something along those lines. And then they follow it up with a phone call. And it's just this layered attack. It kind of builds credibility into it. So again, these are all things to kind of bake into your testing. Are your tests done by an independent third party? So what you don't really want to do is have your internal team doing penetration testing, right? You want to bring in a third party that has no kind of affiliation to anybody, that they're going to just do an honest and objective test. What were the key findings of the most recent penetration tests? When were those remediated? What is our process for remediation? Like, what is the time frame that certain levels of vulnerabilities need to be remediated, right? If your policy says that we are going to remediate vulnerabilities in 30 days, and you get the executive summary that says, well, there was this report or this test was done 6 months ago, and the criticals still haven't been remediated, then your IT or IS, whoever's managing that, isn't following the policies, right? And this is what all comes back to the accountability part, which is where the board can kind of hold them to. Have findings from past tests declined in number or severity, right? So this, you want to use your pen test to continue to kind of move the ball down the field, meaning that your program is steadily improving. So the first time you ever do a pen test, it's probably going to be really bad. They're going to get into all sorts of stuff. And so you take that stuff, you take away what you learned, you fix some things. Next time you have them test the same thing all over again, plus do new stuff. And they're going to find some new things. And you just keep fixing things, you keep putting in new controls, and eventually you're going to get to the point where they can't get anywhere. They can't do anything, right? And at that point, you're on the right path. All right. And here's the big one, artificial intelligence. Everybody's using it today, whether you're using ChatGPT, you're using Copilot. A lot of you, if you're thinking, well, I don't use AI, you're probably using it and you don't even realize it. It's baked into pretty much everything that we use today, especially all the Microsoft stack, whether it's Outlook or Word or you name it. A lot of the online stuff. If you're using Google for your searching, it's baked into there. It is absolutely everywhere. And there's no doubt, right? You'll hear this a lot from the people that sell AI stuff. They're going to say it's a force multiplier, and it really is. It's a total buzzword or phrase, but it really can take somebody and increase their productivity. From my experience, if you get really good at using AI, you can probably increase productivity somewhere between 30 and 50% per person. But again, it takes a while to get there. Probably takes a good 6 to 12 months to get people really on board with using AI and get people trained on it and get your AI kind of trained, right? There's a lot that goes into it, but it can really, really be beneficial. But like with anything, any new tool, it introduces new risks. There really needs to be governance. There needs to be oversight. There needs to be accountability for these tools within your environment, especially if you are plugging these tools into things like wherever your data stores are. So if you're using like a SharePoint or a OneDrive, something along those lines, if you're plugging in Copilot into that stuff, well, you want to be really sure that your certain types of data are not being exposed. So here are some questions that you should be asking. Do you have an AI strategy? Is there an AI policy in place, right, that everybody has acknowledged? Who's accountable for AI within your environment? Right? Somebody should be leading the charge. Do you have an inventory of the AI tools? If you are dealing with regulated data or even really sensitive data, you don't want to open the door up to every single AI tool that's out there, because that could mean your data is walking out the door. So you want to get a handle on what tools are out there and what tools are authorized to be used. Right? How are we ensuring AI is not exposing confidential data or restricted data, right? Restricted data to us is going to be that regulated data. So again, if you're plugging AI into your environment, into your SharePoints, into your file shares, into your critical systems, how do you know that people can't just type in, show me show me a list of payroll for the organization, show me whatever medical records, right? If your AI is not set up properly, you could be exposing that data to your entire organization and you won't even realize it. Right? And how do we ensure AI investments provide measurable ROI? With AI, it can be challenging to calculate ROI, but at the same time, if you structure it properly, meaning that you put it in the right strategy, you do develop the right use cases, and you come up with a plan to measure productivity, you can really see if your investments are making sense. AI is expensive. If you're going to use like something like a Copilot, it's very expensive. You want to be sure that everybody is using it. The other thing to think about too is, does everybody in your organization need access to AI or only certain people? A lot of organizations, they have mixed feelings on it. Some are like, well, we're just going to give it to everybody. Others are like, nope, we want to be careful about who gets access to it. We want to give it to people that are actually going to use it. And so that's something to think about because it can be a very, very costly investment. Okay, so if you ever, if you're looking for something good to read, go get the book Good to Great. It is a great book about leadership styles. They evaluated a bunch of organizations from the late '90s that were really successful, and they basically kind of like identified the similarities of how those were successful. So it's a great book to read. But that phrase "good to great" is really what a board can do for IT and IS. There's a lot of good IT departments out there. There's a lot of good information security departments out there, but proper board involvement can take them from good to great. And the most critical part is going to be accountability. It's going to be measuring their success, right? You want to be able to say, we were here today, we were here 3 months ago, and now here's where we at today. So let me just show you this. This is something that we'll send you when we're done. This is a spreadsheet that you can use to measure the effectiveness of your IT and IS departments. Now, what this kind of covers a whole variety of different things, from IT spend, vulnerability management, incident response, and it breaks it up into two tabs. There's a tab for your monthly, right? And so your IT department, your IS department, they're going to populate this on a month-to-month basis. And then it's going to automatically flow over to the quarterly tab. Now, most IT leadership, IS leaderships meet with the board on a quarterly basis. So that's why we put that quarterly tab in there. So it's going to roll up all the metrics into like what you would see here. This is the quarterly tab. And so one of the first things you'll want to do if you're going to use this is you're going to want to set your goals, which is what the column all the way to the right. The goal is basically going to be your risk tolerance, right? And you're going to say anything above this is or below this is unacceptable, right? So I'll use if you look here, it said the one that's under vulnerability management, it's mean time to remediate endpoints. So this is the amount of time that it's going to takes your IT department to remediate vulnerabilities found on your desktops, on your laptops, right? And if your policy says you're going to do it in 30 days, you want your average here to be below 30 days. But if it comes back and it says it's 90 days, well, then something isn't working right. This goes back to accountability. You can use these metrics to drive excellence within your IT and IS departments. Again, what we'll do when we're done, we're going to send you the presentation with all the questions. This will be attached to it as well. This is extremely useful for getting your IT and IS departments in line with executive or board level expectations. All right, other tools for measuring success. We use some tools in our vCISO, vCIO services where we can measure progress in the engagement. So this one is specific to a vCISO engagement. First thing we're going to do when we come in, we're going to do a gap assessment, and this bottom left image is it's going to show kind of where you're at today after we do the initial assessment. The gray line, I'm sorry if you can't see this very well, but the gray line is where you want to be. The blue line is where you're at today. Now, the image on the right is a company that after we work with them for 6 months, this is where they are at today, right? So they have made a lot of progress. And so as we implement new controls, we come back into the system and we start checking boxes off. And those boxes show that we're making progress. And from a board level perspective, this is information that your IT and IS leadership can provide to the board and say, hey, we're actually moving forwards, right? And we can provide the software whether we work with you as a vCISO, or if you just want to use the software, we can provide it to you as well. The other thing that I mentioned earlier about evaluating the value of your data, right? So here's a good example, right? This was an organization that we worked with. We put the tool out there and it analyzed all the data that was on in their environment. So if you can see here, it says the cost of a breach would be approximately $5 million and the number of instances of that particular type of data that it found. So why this is important is it tells you where your data is at. It also will tell you who has access to it. So your ITIS or even the board can make some determinations on, well, should that data be there? Do we need to put other investments in place to safeguard this data? Do we even want to have this data on our network? Right? These are all things that if you can understand, if you can quantify what the risk is, you can then start making some really, really educated decisions. All right. So this is kind of the proof of the pudding of having a really mature information security program. So this was designed by NIST and the Center for Information Security. They're kind of they build a lot of the frameworks that we use today. So NIST develops all the security controls that the federal government uses, and a lot of what we use in our practice. Center for Information Security, kind of the same thing. But you'll notice here, if you look at this chart, this is kind of the levels of maturity within a cybersecurity program. And if you look at the first three, see it says initial and then developing and defined down there along the bottom. Below that is the likelihood that there's going to be a data breach. So if you see all over here on the left, it says basically you have a very informal information security program. Well, there's up to a 99% chance you're going to have a data breach. But if we start moving down, you notice that percentage gets lower and lower. And there's a huge jump between defined 3.0 and managed 4.0, right? It goes from 69% down to 15%. And the big difference there is measuring. Metrics and measurements define maturity within an information security program. So I can't stress it enough to use use that spreadsheet, customize it to your organization, but then start using that to hold your IT and IS accountable to improve their performance. All right, so how we can help with all of this, right? These sort of trainings we can do. We do board level trainings on a regular basis. We can help you with your AI readiness, your tabletop exercises, which is testing your incident response plans, right? When coming out, basically we'll simulate an incident and see how well your team responds. Penetration testing is a big one for us as well. So if you want to actually validate that your technical controls are working as well as your human firewalls, right? We can do a pretty comprehensive penetration test. All right, we are a few minutes over, so I apologize for that. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Let me look in the chat, see what's there.
Thank you, Nick. So far, I don't think we have any questions, but if you have any questions this time, like Nick said, please feel free, either put them in the chat and I can read them or Nick can read them and we can answer them. But if there are no further questions, I just want to say thank you all for attending today's training, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. And thank you, Nick, for presenting.
Yeah, no problem. Somebody asked, like, when do you expect to send out the slides and the recording?
Oh, great question. That will be done within a week, but hopefully sooner, probably by the end of today. Will get sent to marketing, and then those will be distributed to you next week. Thank you, everybody.
All right, thanks, everybody. Have a great day.